Yes. Economics, I think classes in business are supposed to teach you how to make a lot of money. Economics, if I look at those economics professors, they don't seem to be making that much money. They're not making that much more money than me. So that can't be very good. Economics is you're supposed to be analyzing the economy, right? You're supposed to be understanding it. But when we say the economy, what we mean is our economy, basically, maybe the global economy. What we certainly mean is the economy that runs on capitalism and that runs on money. And you would rarely find, unless an economist is studying, say, ideas about development, you're rarely going to find an economist in the Trobriand Islands because what anthropologists primarily study are those economies and economic systems and ideas that are outside of, beyond market capitalism. So things that oftentimes, probably in your economics classes, as Seth has told us, you're going to be talking about GDP and stuff like that that can be enumerated. Whereas in anthropology, you're often talking about exchanges and decisions that may be beyond the something that can be strictly enumerated. So we may as well start in the Trobriand Islands with our old pal Bronislaw Malinowski, who we talked about writing one of the first ethnographies that was written based on the idea of participant observation. He was, well, he happened to be kind of stranded in this place. He didn't really want to be there, but he made the most of it. And he found something in the Trobriands which is truly extraordinary. Of course, his book is titled Argonauts of the Western Pacific, which is to talk about, equate it to our Western ideas, these ancient ideas of seafaring and heroism. Because, well, Felicia, what did he find there? What was going on in the Trobrians? It is a form of reciprocity. It's called the Kula ring. That ring a bell? The Kula ring, which is, you can find it on page 128 or 9, 129 of your book, which is a form of balanced reciprocity in which certain objects kind of circulate in a clockwise or northward direction, and others circulate in a counterclockwise direction. And there are these trading voyages that they make around these islands, trading necklaces in one direction and armbands in the other direction. And you'd hang on to these things for a period of time, and then you'd pass them along. So people would make these amazing voyages across these islands in order to conduct these exchanges, which were all about accumulating fame and prestige. There wasn't monetary transactions going on. Oh, by the way, this island of Dobu is where Rayo Fortune, Margaret Mead's current husband, was on for a while, and Margaret Mead ended up spending some time in Papua New Guinea as well. She's around here. They're in around the same places at this point in time. But Malinowski is really the first to detail this trade. Yes.
I have a little bit of a weird question.
Sure.
Is that an island called Good Enough?
Is that a,
Is that the island Good Enough?
that I believe is, but I cannot tell you how to pronounce it. You have to pronounce it in that British way and then say hip hip hooray, because I think they're the ones who named it. So, but yeah,
I know I saw that one too,
I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can pronounce it in the way that they would, but I don't think it's exactly good enough. I don't think so. We have to look up that island. Do some googling on that island, and maybe that will be your.
Is that Norman Lee?
This island. Yeah. Well, Normandy, of course, is off the coast of France, but probably somebody, again, these names come to us from colonialism. Some of them were names that people had that talked to the Brits and others who were exploring, but some of them they just plopped on the names, called them whatever they wanted to, like good enough. That's probably somebody's last name. Huh. Boy, we could probably spend a whole class getting into the Trobriand Islands, but we have to move on. This in your book is called a prestige economy in which the objects are circulated. There's a Kula necklace or Sulava. And objects are circulated in one direction and then traded around these partners, and you'd hang on to them for a while and acquire prestige. Now, it's sometimes difficult to understand why people would spend so much time and effort and money going to these places and doing this all for fame. Perhaps it's a little easier to understand if we consider the current craze of the NFT. This one sold for $11.7 million. Now, why this image is stored somewhere? Huh? When did this sell for $11.7 million? Not too long ago, within the last few years. That's when the NFT craze has been out. You have some of them? No. No. Nobody's bought these yet? Made an investment? Yeah. The JPEG ape. So perhaps we can understand, or we can at least appreciate, that the value of things, that how much we value something and how much we're willing to pay for it or exchange or what we're willing to do for it are a part of our cultural ideals. And we would probably, well, many of us probably think it's crazy to pay $11.7 million for CryptoPunk, and you'd be correct. However, if you can resell that later for, say, 13.5 million, then you can be happy. It just sits on your hard drive forever. I don't know. Just stare at it like a painting. But what we have here are these objects which are circulated in a system of exchange, which is obviously very rooted in people's cultural traditions, whether or not we attach a monetary value to it. So this is related to the general idea that there are many different kinds of systems in which we exchange or distribute goods. And Gonzalez talks about some of the classic systems that anthropologists have found. Some of them are under the term of reciprocity, being able to give and then receive. This is a relatively what is called generalized reciprocity. This means that people are basically not keeping account of who has what, but you're giving and receiving kind of in a situation in which you're not keeping careful track of what is being not bought and sold, but given and consumed. What we just talked about, the Kula ring, is an example of balanced reciprocity in which there is some form of accounting. You are supposed to give a certain thing or a certain gift in the expectation that you are going to get something of equal value back or perhaps more over time. And you're keeping account or you're keeping track of who is giving what, and that is very important to the system. In generalized reciprocity, people aren't really keeping books in the same way, although you want to basically level things out over time. There are also systems of redistribution in which resources sometimes flow upward, or you might consider it inward, in toward a certain person, and then they are distributed out again. One example of this is the thing that Boaz was studying and others, the potlatch in North America, where resources would flow up, and then there'd be big feasts and big giving. You would prove your worth by being able to give things away. Yes. Is it the same as the potluck? The potluck is more. She actually does discuss the potluck here on page 132. It can be a form of redistribution. The potlatch is generally of a larger and grander nature, and you're dealing with blankets and coppers and a big debt. Potlatches potlucks are more oftentimes more like a balanced reciprocity thing. But it can, everything is sort of coming in and then is redistributed out around various people. You may remember I made many of you watch a film called Unca's Big Mucka. And probably many of you had to watch this in Professor Suganji's intro class too, which is about somebody who is doing all these ceremonies and accumulating wealth, and it's in order to give it away. At the end, he says, I have given so much, I have won. I have given so much that I have knocked you down. So it's a form of redistribution where things are flowing up to the big man, Unca, who's then flowing them back out again. We perhaps are more familiar with the idea of market exchange. Taylor, how do we do market exchange? What do we use for that? Yeah, certainly the idea of market exchange is that you have one numeric thing that you can use in order to buy and sell different things, and that's going to cut across different categories so that we can buy and sell those NFTs and then make that money into a house, make that money into a car, get a candy bar. That everything has a sliding or a scale based on the idea of money. Now, one of the other things that's interesting here is that barter, or when we trade, a sheep for a cow, corn for potatoes, is often more like a market exchange in the sense that people are often negotiating how much. And in many cases, there's the idea that there's a value behind the objects being exchanged. It's simply that they're not exchanging money in the transaction, but they know kind of how much they would be worth. And sometimes people do this in our own society. Gonzalez talks about Malinowski's example in the Trobriand Islands of Gimwali, which is a form of barter and trade, which is basically they have this whole armband and necklaces thing, but they are haggling here and doing a kind of market exchange within that system as well. Yes, Cyrus.
So does it have to be a universal currency in order to have a market exchange?
You can have both market exchange and other forms of exchange going on within the same society. That's a good question. Let's think about this. Do we have in our society any instances of generalized reciprocity? Does anybody do generalized reciprocity in our society? Yeah. Charities could be considered to, in some cases, a form of reciprocity, probably more like redistribution, that it's flowing into a central place. But that's a good point. That's one way in which our society practices a form of redistribution, right? Resources are flowing into a place and then flowing out to other people. Has anyone ever experienced generalized reciprocity in your life? How much are your parents billing you for the food that you ate and the room that you occupied while you were growing up? Have they given you the bill yet? Not yet. In general, many of our families, I hope in your own, if you don't, it's kind of sad. In general, in your family, you probably practice something like generalized reciprocity, right? Somebody's just giving out the food. They're not actually charging you for it, and you're giving them back love and affection and care in their old age. I don't know, something over time, or you're giving back a smile. Who knows? But the idea is, in many societies, and even in a capitalist system, we usually do not charge our intimate relationships for the things and goods and services that we provide. Does anyone know of any examples of balanced reciprocity in our society? Potlucks, maybe. Have you ever been to a party where people wrote down what was given in the expectation that you would probably maybe get something of a similar value later on at a similar party? You folks do these things at all? In Michigan, they did these, but they knew exactly what I was talking about, or they told me about them because I didn't do these growing up. Anybody do? You don't do graduation house parties? Huh? Some, yeah.
Or like friend gifts and like between his price range and
Oh, so yeah, bring a gift, make sure it's within this price range. You don't do graduation house parties? You do. What happened?
So I had a party and everybody else had a party. But it was the year after. But everybody's party was like kind of similar.
Yeah. And did you have to like give a similar value of a gift? Did everybody kind of keep track of things?
Yeah, the same things we supplied in each party.
Okay. So we might consider this, yeah, a form of balanced reciprocity. In Michigan, they were very serious. They wrote it all down, and then you'd move along and be like, they gave me a $200 JPEG. No, it was back then. It was DVD players. $200 DVD player. I have to give them like the same amount. So my point is here that all societies have forms of reciprocity. All societies have forms of redistribution. Not all societies have market exchange, but many of them do. In fact, probably in today's world, all of them in some ways have some form of market exchange. By the way, do we have any forms of redistribution other than what? Regular taxes. Thank you. Yes. Taxes, right, are supposed to work as in resources flow into the government and they flow back out as roads and schools and hospitals and, well, truth be told, police and military. But gotta pay for something. So that's one of the ways in which we redistribute resources. Now, several of you were interested in these leveling mechanisms. Brady, what is a leveling mechanism? Trying to keep people kind of similar wealth. Mickey, what's an example of that? We could. We're not very good at it though. There are other political systems that rotate the you have to be the leader, you have to be the politician every year. We usually don't rotate in and out. We usually keep the same people in over time. We just kind of change them around. But yes, this is the idea that you either have to, if you're wealthy, you either have to serve the community or you might have to throw a big party yourself and redistribute your resources. Now, some of you said, actually, everybody that wrote about leveling mechanisms says they could never work in our society. Never work. Why not? Why can't we have leveling mechanisms? Evan. Why can't I get just a little bit of that $11.5 million NFT? I don't want the whole thing. I just want 1 million of it. Can I have that? Level it out? You can't give me a little bit? No? None? Come on, man. That's cruel. You need to take some economics to get that NFT. Mickey, you don't think it could work? I don't know, folks. We should have. Yeah, Cyrus.
Like ideally, what is supposed to be like?
Well, I mean, certainly the idea that Marx had from each according to their ability to each according to their need. Many Americans believe is in the Constitution, but it's actually in the Communist Manifesto, is actually, yeah, I mean, that's a kind of ideal that people are giving things out according to their ability, but they're receiving them according to their need. That's the ideal of being able to be in a more equal society. But, you know, you don't have to go all the way to communism to have a leveling mechanism. You could just have a higher tax rate like we used to in the 1950s. Back when we had, taxes, back when people paid taxes on those transactions of their NFTs, and people built things like schools. Most of our schools were built a long time ago. Oh, back when people paid taxes or charged taxes. I don't know. I was kind of disappointed that you all said we couldn't have any leveling mechanisms. We have to have some. The extreme leveling mechanism is, I don't know, I've made some of you read this article. It's talked about in box 6.2, Eating Christmas in the Kalahari, when Richard Lee goes off and buys that big cow, and they all make fun of him in order to make sure that he's not getting too arrogant. And so this is just a leveling mechanism in the sense of you're making sure that everybody is sharing things and that no one is getting a big head. So I guess I still would say that taxes should be. And to this idea that capitalism is all about you yourself getting individual wealth. Remember, what is capitalism about? What are you supposed to do with that wealth if you have it? What makes this a capitalist system? What are you supposed to do with that money? Yeah. You're supposed to invest it in more business and making more stuff. Otherwise, it's not capitalism. It's just me making a lot of money so I can get a big collection of art or JPEGs for me. Like, that doesn't help anybody. Capitalism is about when people invest that money in a new business or opportunity. And if you don't invest it, then we should tax it, and then we can do our own investment. Yes.
Like, art also kind of spending the money in the market.
Well, it's certainly a kind of spending the money in the market, but it's not. It doesn't have to be part of a capitalist system. Let's say, back 500 years ago in Venice when they're buying those big artworks, you had people who had individually had a lot of wealth, and they had artists that were working for them, but it didn't produce stuff, right? It doesn't produce you didn't have a factory kind of thing, or you're investing your wealth into greater production and not just having it all for a palace. I mean, yeah, it's good to have a palace because you employ people, for a time, but it doesn't make more palaces. Right. That's not the way capitalism is supposed to work. You're supposed to at least put part of it back into the system. Otherwise, you got something else, which is just what everybody wants to do, the accumulation of individual wealth without putting it into society. Did you have a question, Liam?
The point of investing in things like not art is to create jobs and more income, more money, more exchange of money.
I mean, art does create, it helps
between one person.
Yeah, it's usually doesn't create a lot of, the same kind of.
Two individuals buying it, selling it.
I mean, it's good to have art, don't get me wrong, but you also need to be making stuff. That's how we get, we have art. Coca-Cola. All right, good. Production. What is production, Nick? Speaking of stuff.
So pretty much production, the reading in chapter 6, they kind of go into how resources are made in each economic region differently. And it says, at the first stage of the economic process, production involves using natural human resources to create items to use. And the chapter went really in depth for an explanation of process production. And it can say, and the chapter goes on to say that the production units can range from any size. From some areas can use one person as a production unit, or for an industrialized society, the unit of production can be a corporation or a business.
Yeah, good. And I think that gets at some of the differences between, say, investing in art and investing in the productive process, right? When you're investing in the productive process as a corporation, you're trying to transform that process in order to be able to produce more things. When you make a deal with even an art shop, you might say, you're not really trying to change the production process of the art itself. Does that make sense? So in the capitalist world, you're trying to really get involved in the process of production. But as Nick has told us, there's all kinds of different ways across the world that people produce things. And one of the sort of key debates in anthropology about production and the production of stuff has been about the role of gender and what different kinds of people produce and what they're supposed to be doing. Francis, what is the deal with gender and producing stuff?
And they had months, and they had the day so my country after the end.
Yeah, we certainly have reevaluated the way in which many hunting and gathering societies, many of the things that they have are from the gathering, not the hunting. And for the most part, I would say, is anthropology showed that the ideas that different people had about what men should do and what women should do were cross-culturally variable and also historically variable. They altered over time. And so some of the classic examples are say, weaving. So in one society, it would be only the women who would weave. And everybody would be like, oh, yes, only women can weave. They're the ones that have the fingers for it. They're the only ones who can do it. Men can't weave, only women. But then you'd go over to another society, and it'd be the men who were doing the weaving. And they'd be like, oh, yes, only the men are strong enough and have the ability to weave like they should be weaving. And so you compare these and you say, wait a second. This is more of a social idea. It is not given in biology. Now, the big debate, though, as Francis has told us, is hunting big animals, is that all something only men can do? And I think the answer to this, although we're still getting there, there's still people who say hunting is just a guy thing. But it seems like we are discovering how much women were involved also in hunting over, especially in the hunter and gatherer groups. And she gives Gonzalez gives a couple examples of societies where women are the primary hunters or the primary hunters of a certain kind of game. But this is in the middle of page 123. There was a thing about, hunting and tracking game in the forest would be difficult for a pregnant woman who might still be nursing one or more infants or toddlers. Now, that idea is based on agricultural ideas about how women, how many children women have. So in agricultural societies, when people are sedentary, people tend to have more children and their birth spacing is shorter. Every 1 to 2 years, you want to be having a kid so you can have that labor for the farm. However, hunters and gatherers usually give birth every 5 to 7 years. So you're not going to be nursing an infant or a toddler. You might have 3 over your productive lifetime. So you can still do plenty of hunting. Anyway, still a little bit of a debate on whether hunting is an exclusively male activity. I think we're finding out no, but there's some people who persist. So, big lesson of this chapter, lesson number 1 is that people have economic systems, make interesting decisions, ways of organizing their resources that are outside of market capitalism or the market system or the systems of monetary exchange. So that's, I think, a huge and important lesson. And if we want to make sure that we know that other people have different ways of organizing their economic resources and that we at least need to pay attention to what people are doing. But there's a second lesson which is perhaps has been less present in anthropology, but we need to understand how the spread of market capitalism, often under colonialism and the transformation of other societies in which people would go in and sort of colonize their resources and try to grow them or take them for other reasons, has affected everybody all around the planet. Everybody today has been involved in a market capitalist society. And so when we look around at some people who are on the edges of this, it's not necessarily because they are happy being on the periphery of the world economy. It's because they don't have the same degree of power in order to buy all the good stuff. So we have to be careful to understand that capitalism does affect all of today's societies and has affected them for a long time. And I think that for me, an interesting example of this was the box on page 127. Right? My page number is wrong. It's the box on page 128. It's pretty close, where it shows a picture of prison inmates and food production in the prison, the idea of spread, and talks about how they can use this stuff to express cultural imagination. So spread. Spread is a makeshift prison meal with an instant ramen noodle base. Anything can be added: beef sticks, hot Cheetos, corn chips, pickles, sweet jam packets to simulate the flavors of food enjoyed on the outside. The cook's imagination is limited only by the ingredients that can be found on the regular meal trays or purchased in the commissary. So, really interesting cultural creativity under these conditions in which you're in prison, but you're still able to get this stuff and cook it up and then do a system of reciprocity within the prison. And then she analyzes it in terms of called social capital, how different high status groups provide insiders with social capital while low status groups have less to offer. So she says that within this prison system, there are people who have the status to be able to accumulate social capital and kind of be at the top of this, which is all great. But there is one little thing that makes this sort of, in my view, a tiny bit absurd. When we're talking about prisoners accumulating social capital within this group, which is that they are in prison. So they may have social capital, but they aren't buying the NFTs. They're not outside accumulating the kind of capital in order to make these larger rules. So my point here in focusing on this example is that we can admire the cultural creativity and the ways in which there are these different social hierarchies and social capital of people in situations like this. But we should also be aware of the larger structures that have created the imprisonment of more people than ever before in an industrial society. There we go. So this brings us to, I think, a conundrum within anthropology, which is one of the ways that we are going in our next reading, which is that we do have to be aware of how people are creative and have been amazing at being able to persist and to generate new forms of cultural creativity. And one of the most interesting places where this occurred, one of the harshest processes of culturation, where people were taken from their own society, put into chains, brought to a whole different society, and basically told that they could not continue their own society and their own culture, that they had to produce stuff for the people that had bought and sold them. Under even the conditions of enslavement in the Americas, people were able to, in some cases, maneuver to create new languages, to create new cultural forms. And so this raises a huge conundrum or a huge issue in anthropology. And if you remember back to the film that we watched about Boaz, and there was that person who said that Boaz was trying to shift anthropology away from the study, basically, of, not that he didn't want to study indigenous people in the Americas, but he wanted to shift anthropologists to study the African American or the Black experience. And the reason he may have wanted to do that is because you had this group which were seen as other or seen as external or different from US society or the society in the Americas, that people saw as being different, but they were very much a product and a part of that society. And so what I think Boaz and other anthropologists were starting to look for there was not just how culture forms off in the distance in faraway places like the Trobriand Islands and Goodenough Island and all these weird places, but how it can form within or inside of our own society and our own experience.